Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a plunge into one of the really enigmatic, often overlooked corners of J.R.R. Tolkien's legendarium,
Mm.
the Blue Wizards.
Mm-hmm. Alatar and Pallando.
Exactly. Now, if you've spent any time in Middle-earth, you definitely know Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast. But what about these two?
Right. They often feel like footnotes, don't they?
You really do. And for a long time, their whole mission was, well, widely seen as a failure.
Yeah, the assumption was they just vanished into the east and, didn't succeed, or worse.
Right. They never came back to the West. So were they failures, lost to the shadows, or did they actually achieve something quietly profound, something that shaped the fate of Middle-earth?
That's the big question.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the origin, the evolution, and the real significance of the Blue Wizards. We're going to be relying on Tolkien's own words, the Silmarillion, unfinished tales, the peoples of Middle-earth.
And those crucial letters, like hashtag 156 and hashtag 211, plus some really interesting later writings Christopher Tolkien compiled.
Exactly. So get ready, because you might need to rethink everything you thought you knew. These forgotten figures, they might just be hidden saviors.
Okay, so to really get into the Blue Wizards, we should probably start with the Istari overall. The Wizards as a group.
Good idea. Lay the groundwork.
So the Silmarillion, in the Rings of Power in the Third Age, introduces them. Basically, 5 emissaries sent by the Valar.
The powers of the West.
Right. Their job was pretty clear.
Yeah.
Help the free peoples of Middle-earth fight back against Sauron. They showed up around TA 1000, Third Age, year 1000.
And the 5 were?
Well, we know them by their Middle-earth names mostly. Curunir, who became Saruman.
Okay.
Olor and Gandalf.
Right.
Iwendell Radagast.
The brown.
Yep. And then the 2 Blue Wizards, often unnamed initially.
So right from the start, there's this sort of mystery surrounding them. Where do we first get a solid mention?
Well, that ambiguity is definitely there early on. Even Tolkien himself in Unfinished Tales, I think it's page 390, he says something like, chief among them were those afterwards known as Mithrandir and Curunir.
Gandalf and Saruman.
Right. But there were others of the Istari. Of these, the most ancient were the 2 who went into the east with Curunir.
Ah, so they went east with Saruman initially.
That's what this passage suggests, yeah. And Unfinished Tales is actually where we first get their names.
Alatar and Pallando.
Alatar and Pallando, yeah. The Ithran Luin, the Blue Wizards. It explicitly says they went east with Curunir.
But beyond that?
Beyond that, for most of Tolkien's published work during his lifetime, their roles, their fates, it was all incredibly vague. Which, led most readers, and maybe even Tolkien himself for a while, to just assume
That they failed.
exactly that the mission just didn't work out for them.
And Tolkien himself kind of cemented that idea early on, didn't he, in his letters?
He did, yeah, very much so. There's a key letter from 1954, letter hashtag 156 to Robert Murray. And in it, Tolkien pretty strongly implies that out of the 5 wizards, only 1 remained faithful.
Meaning Gandalf.
Meaning Gandalf's, yes. And he explicitly lumps the Blue Wizards in with the failures, or the fallen.
Yeah.
He says, the 2 who went east never returned. I suspect they failed as Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty definitive for that period.
Absolutely. For decades, that was pretty much the standard view. Alatar and Pallando, just sort of sad footnote. Lost potentials, swallowed by the east.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because later in life, Tolkien, well, he changed his mind dramatically.
He really did. It's a fascinating shift.
We're talking about a manuscript from, 1973, something Christopher Tolkien published in The Peoples of Middle-earth.
That's the one. And it completely reframes their story.
So what does it say? What's the big revelation?
The big revelation is they didn't fail. Quite the opposite. In this later view, they're credited with this vital long-term resistance effort deep in enemy territory.
What?
Their mission, he writes, was as emissaries to distant regions, east and south, far beyond Numenorean influence, Basically, missionaries in enemy-occupied lands.
So sent specifically into Sauron's strongholds.
Precisely. And Tolkien stresses their very great influence on the history of the Second and Third Ages. How they worked to weaken Sauron's forces, or at least delay his return and mobilization.
That's huge.
It is. And there's this other fascinating bit, that they were founders or beginners of secret cults and magic traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron.
Secret cults? What does that even mean? Like resistance cells?
It seems like it.
Yeah.
Suggesting some kind of subversive spiritual or moral counter-movement right under Sauron's nose, undermining him from within.
That's incredible, because when you think about Sauron's power base, so much of it came from the east and south, right? Those vast armies of Easterlings and Haradrim, they were a constant massive threat to Gondor in the west.
Exactly right. And that's why this later idea about the Blue Wizards is so critical. For huge stretches of the Second and Third Ages, they might have been the only significant counterforce operating in those regions.
They're the good guys out there.
Pretty much. While Gondor, Rohan, the elves were, defending their own borders, Alatar and Pallando were effectively, well, missionaries and saboteurs deep in Sauron's backyard.
Operating behind enemy lines for centuries.
Seems like it. Tolkien mentions in The Peoples of Middle-earth, again, that they were able to hinder the work of Sauron and actually bring help to the few tribes of men who had rebelled from him.
So they were actively supporting resistance movements.
That's the implication. Planting these early seeds of rebellion, keeping some small flicker of hope alive in lands that the West had basically written off as lost to darkness.
Okay, so we have this revised picture of their mission. What about them as individuals, Alatar and Pallando? Do we get any sense of their personalities or how they work together? Details seem pretty thin.
They are very thin, yeah. But there are little clues. Alatar, apparently, was chosen by Oromi.
Oromi the Vala, the huntsman.
That's him. Known as a hunter, an explorer, which kind of suggests Alatar might have been the more active one, the outward-bound leader, perhaps.
Makes sense.
And Pallando, interestingly, is said to have gone along with Alatar, maybe as a friend or by his own choice, rather than being directly assigned.
So maybe more of a supportive role?
Possibly. Maybe offering counsel or moral support, keeping things grounded. You see those kinds of complementary pairs elsewhere in Tolkien.
Like Gandalf and Frodo. Or Frodo and Sam.
Exactly. That dynamic where support and shared burden are crucial for success. And there are some tiny fragments, notes really, suggesting they might have helped foster these small enclaves of good among Eastern peoples. Just enough to keep a light from going out completely.
So let's pull this all together. What's the biggest takeaway? The so what of this massive reevaluation for how we understand Middle-earth?
I think the most profound implication, honestly, is that Sauron's final defeat, the victory in the War of the Ring, it might not have been possible without the Blue Wizards.
Really? That strong a statement?
Tolkien himself says it quite directly in those later writings. He states something like, had they not been sent, the forces of the East would have been so great in the last days that the return of the king would have been impossible.
Wow. So the battles we see, Helm's Deep, Pelennor Fields, the stand at the Black Gate.
They were potentially winnable because Alatar and Pallando had spent centuries subtly undermining Sauron's power base in the east, weakening those armies before they could even fully mobilize.
That completely changes the strategic picture of the war.
It really does. It means their absence from the main story isn't because they were irrelevant. It's actually proof of their success. They were deep cover, humble, faithfully doing this incredibly difficult job far from the limelight.
That is a powerful shift in perspective. And it feels like there's a deeper layer there, too, almost. Well, theological, maybe, given Tolkien's own faith.
I think so, absolutely. You see this theme recurring in Tolkien's work, don't you? That true success, spiritual success, often comes through humility, through unseen sacrifice, indirect influence, rather than grabbing power.
Like Gandalf.
Exactly like Gandalf. Remember letter hashtag 156 again? He succeeded because he refused direct power and never made himself a tyrant, even for the good.
Right.
So the Blue Wizards, in this later view, become these incredible models of that kind of success. Silent perseverance. Their victory isn't flashy or recorded in the Red Book.
No glorious battles named after them.
None. It's a moral, a spiritual victory, one in total obscurity. A bit like Frodo's victory in a way. Quiet, costly, and absolutely essential. And in Tolkien's world, those hidden victories are often the most potent.
So to sum it up, Alatar and Pallando go from being these presumed failures, these footnotes, to potentially being hidden heroes, missionaries, maybe even prophets in a way, subverting darkness right in Sauron's heartland.
Absolutely. Their real significance is because they went where others couldn't or wouldn't, into the deep east and south, where the light seemed almost gone. They kept hope alive, far beyond what anyone in the West even knew.
Ensuring that, as you said, even in the east, the light was not wholly extinguished.
Precisely.
So the Blue Wizards never came back. That part remains true in all versions. But maybe they never needed to, in a sense.
Perhaps their work was done out there.
Yeah. Their legacy wasn't about returning for applause. It was in the action itself, in preserving that flicker of hope against overwhelming odds. It really makes you think, doesn't it? That resistance doesn't always have to be loud or obvious to be effective,
Hmm. Quiet persistence can achieve amazing things.
and that even in the darkest places, maybe a hidden light can prevent total night. It reminds me of that line about Bilbo.
Uh, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many.
That's the one. It just encourages you, the listener, to think about the power of those unseen deeds. How actions that seem small or hidden or forgotten, they can end up shaping the fate of entire worlds.
A profound thought to end on. The hidden heroes.